the way we have to look at it when there's a project or an initiative this big, and we're talking really about trillions of dollars, right? So there are potentially very significant economic implications. When I think about it from China's perspective, I see a couple of things. One, sustaining growth, sustaining this good growth story into an even longer growth story. So they're very good at infrastructure development. I wouldn't say they're finished in China, but this opens up a whole bunch of markets for the Chinese to do what they're very good at, the exportation of that domestic development story. Another thing that it means for China is, as long as China runs current account surpluses, they're either going to be accumulating foreign exchange reserves or pushing money out of the country in terms of other kinds of investments. And I think we've been through the foreign exchange reserve accumulation period, and I think the authorities recognize that there is an advantage in having other kinds of external income generating assets. So from that perspective, that diversification of international assets, external assets from China's perspective is good. From the recipient country's perspective, obviously countries in need of infrastructure, the expertise that you get from China is a positive. One cautionary area, which maybe we'll come back to this during the discussion, is what it does to the external finances of the recipient countries. They are now indebted to China, and some of these numbers can be quite big. So we need to make sure that we've got a handle on that. It's going to be a trade-off for those countries always. The upside is you've got infrastructure development. The potential downside is you've got an external debt burden to subsequently manage. This is a China-centric development initiative. No one will benefit from this more than China, right? I think ultimately we have to recognize that fact, and maybe in the future that will evolve as the projects mature and countries are left with infrastructure. But the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington D.C. has an interesting database which looks at infrastructure projects underway in Eurasia, so Europe and Asia, and they've got something like 2,200 projects in this database. And of the ones that are funded by China, 89% of those projects only contract with Chinese firms. So the experience of several countries on the receiving end of Chinese development is, yes, the Chinese come, and President Bush said this at lunch today. He had an example of this. The Chinese come, they bring Chinese workers, there's a big fence built around something, and so there's not a lot of local labor involved. When the project is over, they all go home. So the immediate benefit, if you will, is not to the local economy, but to Chinese. 7 of the 10 largest construction companies in the world are Chinese. So they're well placed to do this. They're very well placed to do this. They're good at it. So we can perfectly understand that. But I think, there isn't. It's not shared from the outset. I would think more of the concern really is the U.S. losing sort of geostrategic influence in a region, and maybe they're doing. Maybe this is. We've already heard kind of the U.S. backing away and becoming sort of more focusing at home, however you want to put it, more protectionist. We all understand what we're talking about. And China is doing the opposite. And maybe that makes countries nervous, right? That's not something that looks like it's going to change anytime soon. Can China address any of these? Well, no. I mean, some of these are really U.S. issues, right? It's highly symbolic that the U.S. is talking about building a wall with Mexico, and a lot of Latin American countries are trying to figure out ways in which they can become participants in Belt and Road. So they're reaching out to China, and they can't reach out to the U.S. So I think that tells you a lot about how the two countries are sort of approaching their international profile. The way we think about China, don't forget it's still a closed capital account. So you can have a domestic debt situation and an external debt situation which are completely different. There is a domestic debt sort of problem in the sense that it's very high in the state-owned enterprise sector and the corporate debt to GDP. It's high relative to GDP and it's high in nominal terms. Corporate debt in China is around $20 trillion, more than the US and Japan combined. So there's a big debt story there. But it's financed domestically, right? It's domestic banking system, which is funded by domestic savings. Doesn't necessarily need to lead to a crisis. Ultimately, it's unsustainable in the sense that debt can't grow forever, but it doesn't need to fall off a cliff either. There's nothing that can immediately push you into a crisis with a financial structure like that. But what we're talking about here is the external sector, where because China runs continuous trade and current account surpluses, there's this accumulation of either dollars sitting in the central bank, or they invest those dollars outside in projects like this or other income-generating assets. So you can have a high debt level at home while you're still funding projects abroad, and that funding for abroad comes from the external sector itself, right? That's a sort of recycling of current account surpluses, if you think about it with a dividing line down the middle. It's never as neat and tidy as all that, but I think that's probably the best way to think about it.
Was that a don't worry answer, or was it a be worried answer?
No, I think they're two separate things. I think I think even if you were worried about the domestic debt issue, I don't think it affects your view on the external balance sheet of the country as a whole.